You're watching NES A to Z on Hydlide Games. Today is the letter H for Hydlide. Hydlide is an action role-playing game, emphasis on the action part, developed and published by NES Soft in Japan. Being a role-playing game in the 80s, it is very similar to Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy's basic stories. The player controls a character named Jim, a young knight who took action to restore peace into the kingdom. And it also shares similarities with Nintendo's own The Legend of Zelda game, which came out later on. So in the same way that Legend of Zelda original on NES was kind of open world, that's very similar to what Hydlide did years before. Hydlide has inspired other games that came out after it, such as the East series, which is an RPG that has a similar attack action. But what is Hydlide actually like? Hydlide is really hard to get into, at least for me. It's not a pick up and play game. It's definitely not as easy as Legend of Zelda to get into at first. It's also a little bit trickier to understand compared to Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, and what I mean by all that is that when you start up the game, there's no instruction of where to go. There's no instruction on the HUD or controls or the battle system or any of the items and abilities. I even tried entering a couple cheat codes. One cheat code brought you to the end of the game with full items and full stats on your character. Another cheat code that I used allowed you to have full stats, full items, and everything unlocked on your character, but from the beginning of the game, which gave me a little more time to explore the open world, go into some of the dungeons, which are mainly like mazes, because this game was also inspired by the Namco game Tower of Druaga, which is basically like a Pac-Man game, but in the form of an RPG or a fantasy medieval type game. So you can see that some of this game is very maze-like. One other interesting thing to note about Hydlide is the HUD, and then you see the Hydlide logo on the top right. You see your life, strength, experience points, magic. You see information about the monster. On the bottom of the HUD, you've got turn, fire, ice, wave, and flash, which are different abilities or attack types, or maybe magic. I couldn't really figure it out entirely. And then you've got the icon that says defend. You're on defend by default. If you hold down the A button and approach an enemy, it'll switch to attack, and then you can attack the enemies instead of being on the defensive side. I didn't mind it too much, is that the music plays consistently throughout a majority of the game, and the music is a 10-second loop of a little bit of an iteration or inspiration from John Williams' Indiana Jones theme. Now, I apologize to Hydlide fans. I know this game is inspirational and well-loved across the world, selling over 2 million copies in its series entirely, and I don't have time to review it fully or dive too deeply into it, but I did want to shine some light on this game and tell you what it's like to play this game at first. So that's it for today's Hydlide Games NES A to Z. Stay tuned for more on Hydlide Games.